She knocked on his door just to get warm. But the fire that started that night would never go out. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Snow drifted down in slow, lazy flakes, the kind that made the whole world quiet. Out past the ridge, the wind moaned through the pines like it was tired of being alone. Luke Porter was just finishing in the barn when he heard it. A knock. Faint but sharp enough to slice through the storm. He froze, one hand still on the lantern. Nobody came up this far after dark. Not unless they were lost. Or running. He crossed the yard, boots crunching through the crusted snow. Another knock. 3 times this time, urgent, almost scared. Luke pushed open the cabin door and the wind hit first. Then she did. A woman, maybe 30, wrapped in a threadbare shawl that wasn't doing her much good. Her face was pale, lips trembling. She looked like she'd been walking for days. "Please," she whispered. "I just need a place to get warm." Luke stepped aside. "Come in." She moved like her legs might give out. He shut the door behind her, locking out the cold and whatever she'd left behind. The fire had burned low, just a soft orange glow in the hearth. Luke tossed in a few logs and the flames caught fast, painting the room in golden shadow. She crouched near the heat, holding out her hands. They shook so bad he thought she might drop them. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, mud on the hem, snow melting into puddles at her feet. Luke poured coffee from the pot on the stove and handed her a tin cup. "Here, it's hot." She took it like it was a gift from heaven. "Thank you. You walk far?" he asked. Her eyes lifted to his. They were dark, sharp, but tired. "Far enough." He waited, but she didn't offer more. He wasn't the type to pry. "You live here alone?" she asked, glancing around the small cabin. "Mostly," he said. "Got a horse that doesn't talk much, but he's good company." She gave the smallest smile, the kind that disappears before it's real. Then the warmth hit her, and all at once she started shaking harder, not from cold this time, but from something deeper. Luke said softly, "You can rest here tonight. There's a cot in the back room." Her eyes flicked toward the door like she was still thinking about running. Then she nodded. "I don't want trouble." "Trouble doesn't ask permission," Luke said. "It just shows up." For a long moment neither spoke. Only the wind outside, the pop of the fire, and the slow, steady drip of melting snow filled the room. Then she whispered, "Thank you for not asking questions." Luke looked into the fire. "You looked cold." That was enough. Outside, the storm gathered its full weight. Inside, a stranger and a lonely man sat in silence. 2 people who hadn't meant to find each other but somehow did. When Luke woke, the light coming through the window was gray and thin. The storm had passed, leaving a white silence over everything. The air smelled of pine smoke and cold iron. He sat up slow, the ache in his shoulders reminding him how long he'd slept in that chair by the fire. The coals were still warm. The woman was still there, curled up on the cot, a blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. For the first time since she'd arrived, she looked peaceful. Luke poured what was left of the coffee and stepped outside to check on the horses. The snow came up past his boots, clean and untouched except for one set of tracks, hers. He followed them a few feet, just to see how far she'd made it before the storm nearly swallowed her. Not far at all. Back inside, the smell of thawing wool filled the cabin. She stirred, then sat up, eyes wide like she'd forgotten where she was. "You're safe," Luke said quietly. "Storm's gone." She blinked, rubbed her face. "What time is it?" "Early, coffee's on." She swung her legs off the cot, wincing when her feet hit the floor. "I didn't mean to fall asleep. Looked like you needed it." He handed her a cup and she held it with both hands, staring into the steam like it might tell her something. "Didn't catch your name," Luke said. "Mara." He nodded. "Luke Porter." She nodded back, polite but distant. The silence between them stretched thin again. Finally, Luke said, "You running from someone, Mara?" Her eyes met his fast, sharp. "Why would you ask that?" "You showed up in a blizzard without a coat. That's not something folks do for a stroll." She hesitated, then looked toward the fire. "I was working up north, at a small place by the river. Didn't end well." Luke leaned on the table, waiting. "The man who owned it," she said slowly, "thought I owed him more than I did." He didn't ask what she meant. He didn't have to. He'd seen enough of the world to fill in the rest. You got anywhere else to go? She shook her head. No. Luke stared at the fire a long moment, then said, Then you stay here till you figure out what's next. I've got chores that could use another set of hands. She looked at him, half relieved, half suspicious. You don't even know me, he shrugged. Doesn't take knowing someone to do the right thing. That caught her off guard. She nodded slowly. You sure about this? He gave her a small smile. You'll learn. I don't talk much, but when I do, I mean it. For the first time, she smiled back. A real one this time. Small, but it reached her eyes. Outside, the snow began to melt off the roof, slow drops hitting the dirt below. The storm had passed, but something else had settled in its place. Something warmer, quieter, and not entirely safe. The snow didn't last long. By noon, it had already started to melt, leaving behind patches of brown earth and puddles that reflected the pale sky. Luke spent the morning splitting logs behind the barn, the steady rhythm of the axe filling the quiet. Mara stood by the fence, holding one of his old coats that hung loose on her frame. She'd insisted on helping, though it was clear she hadn't done much ranch work before. She tried anyway, hauling buckets, stacking wood, brushing down the horses with careful, deliberate movements. Luke watched her sometimes when she didn't notice. She worked like someone who needed to prove something, to herself maybe, or to the world that had turned its back on her. Those buckets too heavy? He asked finally. She shook her head. I've carried worse. He raised a brow but didn't press. There was a grit in her voice that told him she wasn't exaggerating. By afternoon, the sky had cleared completely. Sunlight broke through the clouds, glinting off the wet ground. Mara sat on the porch steps, rubbing warmth into her hands. Luke handed her a slice of bread and a strip of jerky. You ever worked a ranch before? No, she said, smiling faintly. Closest I got to this was a boarding house with a mean rooster. He chuckled once, quiet but real. Then you're already half-trained. She laughed, and for a brief second, the tension around her eyes softened. When she finished eating, she looked out at the horizon, where the last of the snow was melting into the hills. How long you been out here alone? Too long, Luke said. Since before the war ended. I came west to forget a few things. She glanced at him. Did it work? He met her eyes for a moment, then looked back toward the pasture. Not really. You don't forget. You just learn to live around the remembering. Something in that line made her go quiet. She looked down at her hands. That's true. The wind picked up again, cold but clean. Somewhere a hawk cried out across the ridge. Luke leaned on the porch railing. You said that man you worked for thought you owed him something. You planning to go back? She turned sharply. No, I don't ever want to see that place again. Good, Luke said. Then you don't have to. She watched him for a long time, as if trying to decide whether to trust the calm in his voice. You're not like most men I've met, she said. Guess that depends on who you've met. She smiled, but it faded quickly. You don't ask for anything. I don't expect anything, he said. That's different. The sun dipped lower, turning the snow melt into streaks of golden fire. Luke started stacking the last of the wood while Mara gathered the tools. Their hands brushed once when they both reached for the same handle. Neither spoke, but neither pulled away right away either. It wasn't much. Just a moment. But it stayed in the air between them long after. The days that followed settled into a kind of quiet rhythm. Morning started with the fire, then coffee, then work that never seemed to end. The fences always needed mending. The roof always leaked somewhere, and the horses always found new ways to make a mess of things. Mara took to it better than Luke expected. She didn't complain, didn't shy from dirt or cold. She worked until her hands were raw, and when she smiled, it wasn't the nervous kind anymore. It was small but sure, like someone remembering what it felt like to be safe. By the third evening, she was humming while she washed the dishes, something soft and low. Luke sat near the hearth, patching a bridle strap, pretending not to listen. You sing, he said finally. She glanced over her shoulder. Used to, back when it didn't cost anything. He looked up. What's it cost now? She smiled faintly. Too much breath. They both laughed, the kind of laughter that feels out of practice. The firelight flickered across her face, soft and warm. But just as the cabin started to feel like a home again, the world outside remembered them. The next morning, Luke went out to the edge of the property to check the water troughs. That's when he saw it. Hoof prints. Fresh ones. 3 horses, maybe 4, coming in from the north road. He crouched, running his fingers over the deep cuts in the mud. Whoever it was, they weren't riding light. When he came back to the cabin, Mara was sweeping the floor. He shut the door quietly behind him. "You expecting anyone?" he asked. She froze. "No, why?" "There's tracks near the ridge. Riders headed this way." The color drained from her face. "How many?" "3, maybe more." Her hand gripped the broom handle. "It's him," she said softly. "The man I worked for. He said he'd find me." Luke's jaw tightened. "Then he's got a long ride ahead of him." "No, you don't understand," she said, her voice rising. "He doesn't come alone. He's got men. Men who don't care what they have to do." Luke went to the gun rack and took down his rifle. "Check the chamber, clean and smooth. Then I'll be ready." She stepped toward him, shaking her head. "You can't fight them all." "I don't plan to," he said. "But I won't let them drag you out of here either." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind outside picked up again, whistling through the chinks in the wall. Mara swallowed hard. "You shouldn't have let me stay. You don't even know what kind of trouble I bring." Luke looked at her, steady and calm. "I know enough." He set the rifle against the wall. "If they come, they'll find this place harder to take than they expect." She stared at him, eyes bright in the firelight. "Why are you doing this?" He thought about that for a moment, then said quietly, "Because you knocked." Outside, the wind turned colder. Somewhere far off, the faint echo of hooves carried through the valley. It was still miles away, but closer than either of them wanted it to be. The wind shifted before noon, carrying the sound of horses through the valley. Not loud yet, but close enough to raise every hair on the back of Luke's neck. He was outside, stacking wood, when he heard it. Hooves and laughter. Too easy to be friendly. He looked toward the ridge, then back at the cabin. Through the window, he saw Mara stop what she was doing, her hand frozen on the curtain. She'd heard it too. Luke walked inside, calm and deliberate. "Get your things," he said. Her eyes widened. "We can't run." "They'll see us not running," he said, just getting ready. He crossed to the back wall and lifted an old plank loose. Behind it was a small shelf, 1 box of cartridges, 2 lanterns, and a folded wool blanket. He handed her the blanket. "If something happens," he said, "you get down to the root cellar. It's deep and it locks from the inside." She shook her head. "I'm not hiding while you—" "Yes, you are." His voice was calm, but there was iron under it. "You wanted warmth and a roof. I said you'd have both. That means I handle what comes through that gate." Her jaw clenched, but she said nothing. Outside, the sound was clearer now. 4 riders, maybe 5, moving slow, like men who enjoyed being seen. Luke loaded the rifle, checked the sight. "Stay quiet. Stay low." Through the window, she saw them crest the hill. 4 men wrapped in coats and mean grins. The one in front was older, thick beard, scar down his cheek. Even from a distance, she knew that face, her breath caught. "Jonas," she whispered. Luke glanced at her. "The man you worked for?" She nodded. "He'll kill you if he thinks you're hiding me. Then he'll have to think real hard first." He stepped out onto the porch. The air was sharp, the kind that bites your lungs. The men stopped their horses at the fence line. Jonas dismounted, his boots sinking into the thawing ground. "Morning," he called. "You're a long way off from town, friend." Luke rested the rifle on his shoulder. "That's the point." Jonas smiled without humor. "I'm looking for a woman. Came through here a few nights back. Thin brown hair, travel-worn. You seen her?" Luke didn't answer right away. The silence stretched thin. "I've seen a lot of people," Luke said finally. "Most just passing through." Jonas nodded slowly, pretending to think. "That so? Thing is, I got reason to believe she ain't just passing. She's got something that belongs to me." Luke tilted his head. "You always send 4 men to fetch your property?" Jonas' smile faded. "You talk bold for a man standing alone." Luke didn't blink. "You talk loud for a man who doesn't know where he's standing." For a heartbeat, everything went still. Then Jonas's hand dropped toward his pistol. Luke moved first. The shot cracked through the air, echoing off the valley walls. One of Jonas's men fell from his horse before he even drew. The others ducked behind the fence. "Get down!" Luke shouted toward the cabin. Mara hit the floor just as glass shattered behind her. The fire roared up, feeding on the sudden burst of wind. She crawled toward the back wall, heart pounding, ears ringing from the gunfire outside. Luke ducked behind the water trough, firing once, then again. The men returned fire, bullets splintering the porch railing. Smoke filled the air, thick and bitter. Jonas shouted from behind a horse, "You can't keep her, Porter." "She's mine!" Luke yelled back, "No one belongs to you." The next shot came close enough to clip his hat. He rolled to the side, slammed a new cartridge into the chamber, and fired again. Another man went down. When the last echo faded, there was only the wind again. Jonas was still standing, blood on his arm, face twisted in rage. He stepped out from behind the fence, gun raised. "You should have stayed out of this." Luke leveled the rifle. "So should you." The two shots came almost at the same time. When the smoke cleared, Jonas lay still in the dirt, the wind already covering him in snow. They say every storm leaves something behind. Sometimes it's a broken fence or a scar in the earth. Sometimes it's quieter, something you can't see, but you feel it every time the wind shifts. For Luke, what was left that winter wasn't loss. It was warmth. Not the kind that comes from fire or whiskey, but from knowing someone else finally sat beside him at the table. Mara stayed on the ranch through the thaw. Spring came slow that year, melting the snow into rivers that fed the grass again. She worked the land like she meant to belong there, and maybe she did. Some nights Luke would catch her standing on the porch looking out at the stars with a kind of peace that hadn't been there before. He never asked her where she came from again. Some questions didn't need answers once you knew the shape of the silence that carried them. Every night, the same ritual. He'd bank the fire, she'd check the latch, and they'd share one last quiet moment before bed. The cabin wasn't just shelter anymore. It was something that breathed with them. And sometimes when the wind hit the roof just right, Luke would think about that first night. The knock on the door, the woman with frost in her hair and fear in her eyes. How she'd only wanted a place to get warm. He'd smile then, slow and quiet, because he knew the truth. The fire he'd built that night hadn't just been to keep the cold away. It had been waiting for her. Maybe that's all any of us are doing out here, tending the fire until someone finds their way through the dark to it. So if you ever see a light burning out on a lonely stretch of land, don't be afraid to knock. Someone might be waiting on the other side, just trying to stay warm too.